Hello, colleagues. I think you can hear us now and you can see us. I think we have everybody with us. Sorry for that delay. We had difficulties in Dennis, I can see you. And I think Helen is online. And Dolly, I can see you, but I can't. Oh, there's Mary. Hi, Mary. Very nice to see you or hear you. I think we're waiting for the rest of the colleagues, right?
Yes, Antonio, just I know Helen was online just with the delay. She may have stepped away for a moment. We do
That's
have Mary
fine.
Robinson online. You could perhaps stand by a moment and I'll just check with Helen. Stand. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
here.
I'm here. I'm here, but
There we are.
yeah.
Hi, Helen. Welcome.
Hi there. Thanks.
And I see that we have the number of attendees rapidly increasing. I'm very sorry for the delay.
It's okay.
Technical problems, as always, with these things. Since COVID-19, we've gotten better at using these things, but apparently there's still hiccups. So thank you, colleagues, for being with us. And we will start shortly. Let me just make sure that we have everyone online that we need to do this. And yes, I think we should be ready. And it's being recorded, I presume. So if we're okay, then let's please start. And it's very good to have you all with us, colleagues. Thank you for good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For some of you, it's very early in the morning there. I want to especially thank the colleagues that are joining us from New York and the Americas because I know it's well beyond midnight right now. But it shows you the dedication and the commitment to what we're going to be talking about today. My name's Antonio Cisneros. I'm a UN staff member for over 26 years, and it's a great honor for me to be acting as the moderator of this conversation with two of the elders and two former UN staff members, which is great. True examples of dedication to human rights and to the universal values that we stand for as an organization and, of course, as humanity. Please join me in welcoming Elders Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, High Commissioner for Human Rights, my first boss at the UN, and Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and Administrator of UNDP, with whom I've had the pleasure to work with as well. It's a pleasure to have you both here today, and thank you for taking your time to discuss your visits to the Gaza border with us.
Thank you.
Mary and Helen have kindly agreed to answer any questions, colleagues, that you may have about their visit to the Gaza border. So this is a great opportunity. I would encourage you to type your questions in the chat, which is the easiest way that we can see them. And of course, I have colleagues here that are going to be parsing through your questions and will hopefully help me unmute you if technology works so that you can ask your questions directly to Mary and Helen. If the unmuting doesn't work for some reason, or if you would prefer, then I can ask the questions for you. But you can start typing in your questions now. We're very eager to hear from you. But let me start the conversation with two questions. Perhaps as you're thinking about what questions you would like to ask, I would like to ask you, Mary, if possible, if you could tell us more about who the elders are and what motivated you to go to the Gaza border and see for yourselves what was happening there. This for colleagues that may not know the elders as well as others. And Helen, if you could tell us a little bit about what you saw when you arrived there, how it matched with your impressions of what was happening before arriving there, and of course, especially what your impressions were of the work that the UN is doing there, being so vital to the situation. So if I can give the floor first to Mary and then Helen, that we can start the conversation. Over to you, Mary.
Okay. Thank you, Antonio. I will answer your question about the elders, but actually I want to begin with that last point you made, what the UN staff are doing. I was listening on our main news program this morning, Morning Ireland, at about 8 o'clock our time, about an hour ago, to your colleague, James Elder, who has been in Gaza for most of the time, speaking about what this peace process and peace potentially would mean. And he spoke so movingly, especially about the children, needless to say, from UNICEF. But it's a reminder, of the brave staff who've been there, the staff who've tried, and the staff, I know Helen will speak to this, that we met in Cairo. And then some came with us to Al Arish and to the Rafah border. But we saw the wonderful cooperation between the Egyptian Red Crescent and the UN staff. I just wanted to make that point. But I was a founder elder, so I'm able to speak from the very beginning. Nelson Mandela, when he founded the elders, and there were 12 of us, told us that one of the things we needed to focus on was peace in the Middle East. And of course, one of the elders was Jimmy Carter. Archbishop Tutu was our chair. Kofi Annan was a member also. I took part in 3 of the elders' visits to the Middle East in those days. I think in about 2009, one led by Carter, we met with President Shimon Peres, among others. We didn't go into Gaza on that occasion, but in 2 subsequent visits, in I think about 2011 or 2013, I did go into Gaza. In fact, on the 3rd visit, I led the visit with Lakhdar Brahimi and Ela Bat, and we didn't go through the border from Jordan, which we had earlier. We went through, we flew to Sharm el-Sheikh and took the drive to the border, and we saw this tiny enclave, if I could put it that way, so crowded with people. I mean, I couldn't get over how small the space was. And we talked to some teenagers who had no hope then. And I'll just jump forward to the most recent visit I made to Tel Aviv, East Jerusalem, and Ramallah was in June 2023 with my then deputy. I was chair of the elders at the time. My deputy was Ban Ki-moon, who of course had his own familiarity as Secretary General with what was happening. And we did meet with Herzog, the president. We didn't meet with Netanyahu, though we asked to. We didn't expect to, but we didn't. Herzog didn't treat us very well, and Ban Ki-moon was annoyed. He met us in a kind of military compound in Tel Aviv, and when we asked for a photograph, he said, "We'll go outside." There was something but not really wanting to record the visit. But we issued a report on the 25th of June, I think it was, 2023, just a few months before this terrible, the terrible attacks by Hamas on and the taking of hostages. And we said the situation was unsustainable, and nobody really paid attention. So we then had our meeting in May, and we decided in May of this year, we decided that there was too much confusion about the facts at the border because Israel was very powerful in its PR about what was happening, and that it needed a direct witness. And Helen and myself agreed, and we managed to find that date in August to go. We were almost afraid that we might have missed so much was happening and the situation was so serious. But actually, I think our timing was very good. And I'll let Helen take over about the visit and what we saw and heard and, speaking truth to power.
Well, thanks, Mary. If I segue in there. When I was at UNDP, I went to Gaza. It was either 2012 or 2014. And like Mary's impression there, one came away with the knowledge that a large number of people were confined to a very small place under siege. One looked at the very difficult conditions for those who entered and left Gaza, running a gauntlet, as it were, at the Israeli border. I recall going to be at the opening of a water treatment plant that UNDP engineers had overseen, funded by the Japanese in Han Yunis. I imagine it's, of course, completely shattered by bombing now. And speaking to women then who talked about how their family's health was ruined by the salty and non-potable water that they and their families were drinking. I recall meeting the whole UNDP team, a civil society group, quite broad-ranging from NGOs to university staff. It left a deep impression on me with people saying, we live in an open prison here. And as we know, for the last 2 years, that, quote, open prison has been subjected to continual bombardment, tens of thousands of deaths, injuries which can't be properly addressed, and deaths from other preventable causes like not being able to get treatment for pre-existing conditions, and now, of course, the famine that's unfolded in parts of the territory. So it was against that background that we went to the Rafah crossing in early mid-August. And I've described the way I felt there as it felt eerie, it felt chilling, because you were on the sort of relative normality of the Egyptian side of the border. We went to El Arish, we went to the hospital, we went to the warehouse, and then you drive to that closed crossing where absolutely nothing is happening, no one comes or goes. And you know that on the other side is the most incredible human suffering. Before we went to the closed crossing, we went to the Red Crescent warehouses where the UN supplies, among other supplies, are clustered for putting onto trucks to go up the crossing, which runs up the sort of Gaza-Egyptian border to the tri-point with Israel. And we saw then, and Mary and I have spoken about it a lot, these warehouses full of rejected goods like wheelchairs and crutches and children's toys that happen to be in a metal box, and so on. And then when we went to the border itself and were able to talk to truck drivers who came back down with fully laden trucks from the Sol crossing into Gaza, we asked them, what are you carrying? Food. Why were you turned away? Don't know. What are you carrying? Medical supplies. And we could see the boxes with World Health Organization marked all over them. Why were you turned away? Don't know. We look at the consignment note. There's a truck full of, medical devices for dealing with wounds, as simple as sutures, nylon stitching, whatever. I mean, there's just no rhyme or reason for these kinds of goods not to be allowed across. And so we called it out. We said we were very shocked by what we saw. We knew of the suffering on the other side. We knew the food was needed. We knew the medical supplies were needed. The disability supplies were needed, and they couldn't get through. And there's just no sound reason for this. Now, at that time, we referred to both an unfolding famine and an unfolding genocide. Not so long after we were there, famine was basically declared by the accepted international system for that. And of course, as we know, people are dying from starvation, particularly children, and others will be irreparably harmed for life from what has happened to them with the huge scarcity of food. On the unfolding genocide, of course, there are those who will say this is genocide is a matter for the courts to determine. But we took the view that the UN Convention is a convention on the prevention and punishment of genocide. And where you have reason to believe that a genocide may be unfolding, there is a duty on member states to act to prevent it. And we do strongly believe that there was a genocide unfolding. Now, since our visit, the UN Commission, headed by one of Mary's successors, Navi Pillay, at the UN Commission for Human Rights, has come down with the finding that 4 of the 5 legal tests for genocide have been met. So we feel we're on very strong ground with what we're saying, and one hopes that one day those responsible for this horror will be brought before a court of justice. But of course, much has moved on since we were there, including these latest developments with the, quote, peace plan. And, one feels, today, just a sense of happiness for the families of all those who are to be released and the releasees themselves, hostages one side, prisoners and detainees the other. But we know that, this is the first and, in a sense, easiest step. Previous ceasefires have broken down. This one is quite ambitious in its reach. If you look at the whole plan, there are elements of the plan, of course, are quite contestable. But for now, we can feel happy for those about to gain their freedom. But it's going to be a long road ahead, and I think whether that road succeeds will very much depend on President Trump keeping the bit between his teeth in seeing it through. He has used the leverage that he has on Israel, and I think, Mary, it would be fair to say that the elders have been calling on the United States to use the leverage they've got for the last 2 years. And on the other side, of course, Turkey and those other states which have the ability to talk to Hamas and have some persuasion with them are also doing everything they can. But yeah, in summary, things have moved on since we were there, thank goodness. But the situation got a lot worse in the weeks after we were there until, happy day, the guns may stop firing with the agreement to be ratified by the Israeli cabinet today. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Helen and Mary. I mean, you described the situation in such difficult terms. I cannot imagine what it was like being there and seeing all this in person. You highlighted two things, and while I ask you this question, I'm going to encourage colleagues to please write their questions so that we can make this a very interactive discussion. But you've highlighted one of the key roles that the UN has. When there's confusion about facts, when there's confusion about what is happening, the UN is usually an authoritative voice on with definitive answers on what is really happening. And you mentioned the report of the Commission of Inquiry, which I think does a pretty good job in outlining what is really happening there. Coincides very much with your statement and the findings that you presented at the end of your visit to the border. But it hasn't received the attention that one might have thought would be received. And so, any views on why this is, and if you have been doing anything on your side to make sure that attention is given to this report, would be one question. And then you spoke about the long road ahead, and I think that's actually a very good way of describing any possibility of having a resolution to all the atrocities that are being committed at present. And of course, the long roads, the UN also has the capacity to learn from other experiences in other parts of the world where we have gone through peace processes. We have seen them fail. We have seen them succeed, and we've taken lessons learned of what made them succeed. One example is the role of women in being part of peace negotiations. Taking a victim-centered approach and so forth. What are some of the key elements that you think we could use from what the UN has learned in the past to make sure that this long road ends up with the desired outcome that we want, which is not relapse into conflict, not relapsing into the situation that we have today, and making sure that we have the strong foundations for a durable peace.
You go first, Helen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, firstly, as you say, the UN in any situation is normally regarded as an authoritative reporter of facts on the ground, calling it as it sees it. I think that the UN, like other observers on the ground, has come in for the most extraordinary and undue and unfair criticism to try and tarnish the message that it has been putting out day in day out. I mean, you think of the pressure that Philippe Lazzarini and his staff are under. Tom Fletcher has continually called it out since taking the OCHA job. James Elder, as Mary said, has been very vocal and compelling. And you think of all the local staff on the ground and what they are doing and their witness to what's happening. But this has been a particularly shocking conflict because despite hearing all this, the world just stood by and watched. And I think we formed the impression that the only way this could stop would be for the United States to use leverage, which has finally happened. And if they continue to use leverage, let's hope you can move along the spectrum towards peace. Now, on what would need to happen for that peace to bed in, each context is different. One can think of, for example, Colombia. End of half a century of civil war. In that particular case, as I recall, there were cantonments that fighters and their families came into. That may or may not be relevant. The plan that President Trump has put out there talks about amnesties for Hamas fighters who come forward. I mean, are we talking cantonments? Who would deal with that? I don't know. Secondly, I think an international force of some kind can be very, very, very useful. And we've seen that in a number of settings. Even in the immediate setting, the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt has been policed by a multinational force since the early 1980s. And I happen to have visited it twice because New Zealand was a country that put its hand up early and is still involved in the multinational force. And it's been quite successful. Apparently, the UN at the time wasn't able to get agreement between member states to do it. So it was a kind of, a force made up of those who volunteered. Maybe this will be, but again, the peace plan talks about an international stabilization force, and I think it definitely would have utility in demarcating both sides. Now, definitely involve the women, and Mary will know, as I've known, that there are very active peace groups, women's peace groups between Israelis and Palestinians, who must be part of building the peace of the future, a peace that does justice to women as well as to the general population. I think there's a huge job to be done if this is to be seen through to what we hope would be a two-state solution for trust-building interaction between the two communities, because currently it's very much separate lives. And events like we've seen for the last 2 years, and indeed for the decades before, have obviously produced extremely strong feelings from many on one side towards many on the other side. And if two states really are going to live together in peace, there have to be ongoing processes of peace and reconciliation and dialogue and trust building. But I do think the UN and its toolkit, it has a lot of corporate memory on how to support those who wish to go down this road, and I really hope our agencies will be involved to the fullest extent.
Yeah, maybe just to build a little bit on what Helen was saying, because I agree with everything she's covered. The role of women, we marked the 25th anniversary of that Security Council Resolution 1325. I happened, with Binta Diop, my great friend, to co-chair on the 10th anniversary a civil society group linked to the UN, and we got a Security Council meeting with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State at the time and everything. It was a big moment. Somehow we've never managed to get that resolution as meaningful as it is. And I want to be a little bit critical of the UN, because I want to be honest with colleagues. I don't think the UN is often enough on the ground with local groups. Take, for example, another famine in Sudan at the moment. I'm hearing from some of my Irish colleagues of Trócaire, Concern, Goal, who are on the, trying, especially in Darfur. It's the local kitchens that are feeding the population, not the UN. And I think just to be a little more humble in places and work with local people and build up their capacity. I think the UN needs to learn a little bit of a lesson of building capacity of others, rather than always thinking it's the UN that's going to solve the problem, which we know it isn't. I know that's a criticism many of you would agree with, if I could put it that way. I'm still seeing too much top down and not enough real. And I think we have to get really, we have to see how it's possible to build up local communities. And I want to build on the other thing, women's peace groups and other peace groups that have been building up. And the elders, for what it's worth, I hope I'm still, can you still hear me? I just got a thing about low battery.
Yes, we can hear you,
okay.
Mary.
Well, the other thing is the elders, partly because Zaid al-Hussein drew our attention to it, have been very supportive of a Palestinian-Israeli initiative called A Land for All. It seems utterly impossible when you first hear about it, the idea of a confederation between Israel and Palestine, keeping that border, but having it as a kind of open border and having the settlers in the West Bank, residents of this state of Palestine that would be created, and citizens of Israel, and so on. It seems, but actually, I more and more think it probably is the only possible real two-state solution for peace. And I think, it's probably important to grow this real link between. It started as kind of fairly academic and in the diaspora of both Israel and Palestine, but it is growing. And I think we need a vision for the end that is a vision of real peace, and it has to be built given the trauma and basically moved to the right of most Israelis on this issue, and the trauma of the Palestinians. And it's somehow we've got to break through with some kind of vision. So the elders are increasingly raising a land for all as much as possible. I know that the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia is very interested, and there is a possibility of moving that forward somehow.
Thank you so much, Mary and Helen. You've answered quite a few questions that we already had on the chat box, and I want to thank Nicholas and others for raising some of the issues that you addressed. There are also questions about this plan, the importance of Palestinians being responsible for their role in administering whatever is the outcome of this peace plan, and not having other corporations and so forth taking over. So any comments on that would be welcome. Also, questions on accountability and the fact that we've always faced this question, of just peace, right? The accountability. When should this be sacrificed for the sake of peace? That we've always heard questions like that and arguments like that. And then there's a question about language. You mentioned genocide. The Commission of Inquiry also uses the term genocide, but somehow many colleagues are complaining over the fact that this isn't adequately reflected in the way the terms that are being used, even by our own organization, even by many of the entities in our organization, and the way they present this as a crisis, as something very neutral, very bland, which is not really speaking to the depth of what's happening in Gaza. So any comments that you would have on these three issues, I would be grateful to hear from both of you.
Maybe I'll start on the governance, and it might get Mary's legal brain in on the latter bits. But look, the elders have engaged a couple of times this year with the Egyptian foreign minister, well, more than a couple of times, because the Egyptians were quite forward-leaning in putting forward the plan from the League of Arab States on the future governance of Gaza. And they've always foreseen that the first step should be a technocratic Palestinian administration in the transitional stage. Now, when you look at the Trump plan, it talks about a technocratic and apolitical Palestinian interim government. But then you have the suggestion of the Board of Peace, which would be headed by President Trump, with other heads of state yet to be specified, but one assumes Qatar, Egypt, maybe Turkey, who knows, and other luminaries, including Tony Blair's name was mentioned. Now, look, first thing, it should be a Palestinian technocratic administration that takes it forward. The Palestinian administration has said that it is willing to undertake a range of reforms to make itself more fit for purpose, if you like, and that's referred to in the Donald Trump peace plan as well. If a sort of, quote, board of peace headed by the US president with other senior heads of government on it would keep everyone's feet to the fire to move the process forward, I'm not going to dispute that. I think whether we get from where we are to happy days, some kind of two-state solution, will very much depend on ongoing US engagement at the highest level. Quite where others who aren't heads of state and government right now come in, I wouldn't know. But I would think that at this point, the agreement, this detailed agreement on the steps in the Trump plan are to get agreement to a ceasefire with the hostage release and the prisoner exchange and the Israeli withdrawal to a certain line. And the first line, I think, still leaves them 53% occupation of the territory. But I think there's a lot of these details yet to be thrashed out. And I think the Egyptians in particular, that, you know, and their leadership within the League of Arab States is very focused on the Palestinian governance. So let's just see how this develops. This is one of many details where the, you know, the devil's in the detail, as we would say. On the wording, yes, the UN officially has not used the term genocide, and it may be that they take the very legalistic view that this is a matter for the International Court. I guess the view we took when using the term unfolding genocide was that it's unfolding right now. The International Court is not expected to rule until the end of 2027 at the earliest. And if things just carried on as they were, you may well double the number of people who've been killed. And in the end, it's no comfort to, you know, victims of an unfolding genocide that a court some years down the track determined that it actually had happened. So, Mary, I'll bring you in here to ruminate on these issues.
Yeah, I'm very worried about the issue of accountability because the rule of law is being undermined so severely in our world today. I was so pleased with the courage of South Africa in initiating that case before the International Court of Justice. And it has been a very significant case. Ireland has suffered a bit because we supported that process. In other words, it's a world where you're bullied if you do the right thing. Then the ICC indicted both Netanyahu and his defense minister, and also the Hamas, who are both, I think, killed now. It is really important that there will be justice for what is happening on both sides, that Hamas is called to account, and that an Israeli extremist leadership, which it is, an extremist leadership, which has led to the devastation and, as we say, unfolding famine and genocide in Gaza, and terrible decimation in the West Bank. I mean, what's happening in the West Bank is truly shocking. All of that, there needs to be accountability, or there will be no peace. It's stunning that when sanctions were imposed on, you know, the prosecutor Khan of the ICC, no real protests from European governments. You know, the rule of law is being undermined in a way that's really quite shocking. And, you know, I noticed that Navi Pillay and her colleagues resigned immediately after they'd issued the report because they wanted to, probably because they wanted to avoid sanctions. Sanctions, when they're imposed by the United States, are terrible because they freeze your bank account. And somehow, if the US does it, banks all over the world do it, just out of something or other. And, you know, it's a very cruel situation to try to navigate, and it shouldn't happen when people are fulfilling international roles of this kind on rule of law and accountability. So the undermining rule of law, and many of us would like the leadership of the UN to step up more on this issue, if I may say so. And I don't mean actually the High Commissioner. I think Volker has really tried, and he has said some very brave things, which I really appreciate. And I met him recently in Dublin, and we had a good talk about the position. And being High Commissioner is always the hardest job in a time of undermining of rule of law and accountability. And I think he's done his best. He's a voice that I really respect.
Thank you so much, Helen and Mary again. I mean, we completely coincide. Actually, this group, United Staff for Gaza, is an independent association of colleagues that are precisely concerned over the impact that the disregard for international law can have, not just on this situation, the specific situation, but going further, and the whole architecture, international architecture of protection that we have built in 80 years, which we're seeing is completely ignored in many cases. And the impact this could have over the UN, but more broadly over the world itself, if we destroy this whole system that we've had. Attacks against judges, attacks against special rapporteurs and human rights mechanisms that are doing their job for doing their job, and reprisals against them. I wanted to pick up on two other issues that have been appearing in the questions. One is the issue of famine, which was highlighted very much in your report, and the attempts by local people, these bottom-up approaches that Mary was talking about, rather than top-down, to deliver food, including the flotilla, Sumud, and others, and why the international community, or more specifically the UN, hasn't supported them more. And then the other one is the participation in a peace process of Palestinian people. Can we really expect a durable peace if Palestinians themselves are not having a say in the discussions about where the future of Gaza is going to go? So let me start with these two, which are questions from several colleagues, and then we can go to other aspects.
One of the comments made to us at the meeting we had in Cairo with many representatives of Palestinian civil society, which included judiciary, university leaders, a wide range, was from one eminent man who said, "Will Gaza prove to be the graveyard of international law?" It's quite a challenge, isn't it? Because right now it looks like the graveyard of international law if there's no accountability for crimes committed. So I let that thought hang. Secondly, on pulling Gaza out of a famine state, one of the meetings we had in Cairo was with an Egyptian company which used to distribute to the Gaza merchants. And even though Gaza has been under blockade and siege for years prior to the events which have followed October 7th, there was a functioning market of merchants who imported goods and sold them and traded them. And as we know, the bakeries who bake bread and so on. The sooner we can get back to that, the better. The sooner we can get away from, a food distribution aid system to a local early recovery with livelihoods and people importing goods and getting them out through distribution networks, as in the past, the better. And one would hope with a ceasefire, if you can bring in. I remember when UNDP was faced with circumstances like these, you had your early recovery teams. The first thing they did was to go in to try to recreate livelihoods in these local markets functioning. So, the sooner that could happen, the better, if this ceasefire is going to hold. Over to you, Mary.
Yes, just on that last point, I would even add also farming, to get the land back, clear it of the dangerous land and probably cluster bomb and God knows what's on that land. But there was also a local producer farming background in Gaza, which we saw when we were there earlier years. On the participation in the peace process by the Palestinian people, one of the reasons why I kind of join with Zaid in strong support of a land for all is it's this question of identity. The land for all idea would allow Israelis to be residents of a Palestinian state and citizens of Israel, and likewise for returned Palestinians to be residents of Israel and citizens of their state of Palestine. And it reminds me of the Good Friday Agreement and the way in which you had this fluid sense of multiple identity. Equally, I'm reminded of the fact that there were two IRAs. There was the military IRA and there was the political, involved in a peace process. And Jerry Adams bridged both, frankly. And eventually, it was realized we've got to make peace in a way that involves those who commit to peace. Hamas is part of the community of Gaza, and indeed, to some extent, part of those who support it in the West Bank. Therefore, I think they have to be part of a bottom-up solution. But in the meantime, I think it makes sense to have a technical government of Palestinians. And I kind of agree with Helen that it actually would be useful to have a high-level board for peace of heads of state of the region, because frankly, it's only recently that heads of state of the region, because their people are boiling with anger about what's happening in Gaza, it's only recently that they have really committed. They weren't committing before. They weren't, even Egypt wasn't committing enough. So to have and to have Turkey involved and maybe Malaysia or, having a significant involvement of different heads of state from the broad region and the Muslim world would be helpful, because that would be a guarantee for the Palestinians that they will be, part of the solution, as they should be. It's their country.
Thank you so much. I was having difficulties unmuting myself, but two additional points that are coming up, and I think are worth exploring because you highlighted them in your statement. Is again back to the issue of accountability, due diligence, and whether the UN is applying due diligence in the work that it's doing, but also efforts that of member states. You highlighted a particular country that has stopped exports of arms to that could be used in Gaza, and any other efforts by other states to do that, and how we can support this both as the organization and as the international community more broadly. And then there's also a question on the recognition of Palestine as a state. Of course, several member states have advanced this in the UN, recognizing Palestine as a state, and how this could also be one way of facilitating a solution by forcing the recognition of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations and of the international community of nations. So over to you with these two additional questions.
The elders said many months ago that recognition of the state of Palestine now would be a transformative step towards, an eventual two-state solution. So we've been happy to see the growing number of countries. It was really, for the most part, Western countries which were holding out on recognition, and some still are, as we know. And also, the small constituency that's been mobilized around Israel, which sadly includes some of the states in the South Pacific region, where the sort of fundamentalist Christianity seems to play a role in shaping attitudes on issues like this. But I think that that momentum for recognition of Palestine from European states, from Canada, from Australia, the UK, if we also count as a European state, I think this probably added to the perception in the White House that Israel was increasingly isolated, because countries that have been pretty muted, let's face it, in their criticism of what was happening, were starting to pivot to say, this is unacceptable. We're going to take this step. We want to, make it clear that we favour, holding on to a two-state solution. I think that was all very, very positive. Over to you, Mary.
Yeah, again, just to add to what Helen was saying, I'm actually, appreciative of some independent media, particularly in the UK, pointing out that the UK is still providing arms, and in September was providing arms to this Netanyahu extremist government. And Germany has taken a step, but it's a small step. The real problem, and why recognition, in my view, is so important, and I'm glad that my own country, Ireland and Spain and Norway and Slovenia, gave some leadership earlier on this issue and paid a price for it. But that was important. It's important for the EU to have more recognition, because we still have this preferential trade, this pillar of preferential trade, because it requires a two-thirds majority and at least one or other of Italy or Germany to agree. We can't suspend that pillar, and this is driving young people away from support for the EU into the arms of the far right in some countries. Just discussed, as happened with many voters in the United States on the Gaza issue, which enabled a certain person to get where he's got. But I think it's really important to both stop the arms and stop the trade and keep that pressure up, and keep that sense of an isolation of Israel, because it deserves it at the moment, not the Israeli people, but this extremist government.
Thank you so much. I see we're running out of time, although of course we started a bit early, and apologies again for that. But I just wanted to let you know that if you look through the comments, there's a lot of comments really thanking you for the clear language that you've used, and how you have called out all the atrocities that are being committed there, and the work you have done, even talking bilaterally with different people, and also speaking to the public so that the people will be aware of what's happening in Gaza. And also a lot of questions about our initiative, the United Staff for Gaza, and how they can be in contact. I'm going to ask the colleagues that are helping me to please put on the chat box both the statement and the report that the elders have issued. I think it's a very good report, and it's very useful for what we have, as well as information on United Staff for Gaza, so that they can contact us and learn a little bit more about what we're doing. But I didn't want to end this without asking you, as former UN staff, to give us a little message for those of us working in the UN at present, your former colleagues. And I would be particularly grateful if, Mary, you could tell us what message you would have to young UN staff. If you look at this initiative and other initiatives, it's really young UN staff members that are leading on initiatives like this. And some of them have just joined the organization because they want to do something meaningful for the world. So any message you would have to them. And then after that, Helen, if you could also tell us a little bit what message you would have to our UN colleagues that are working in Gaza and its surroundings, having seen the difficult circumstances that they're experiencing, at some points even risking their lives. So any message from you would be very appreciated.
Well, let me start with my recent meeting in Dublin with Volker Turk. I said I wanted to give him the biggest hug that I could, because it has become so much more difficult to uphold everything the UN stands for. And the most important thing the UN stands for is its normative framework, is its framework of The Charter itself, the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the environmental regulations, etc., all of that is the rock of the UN, is being undermined at the moment internationally. And so I think my message to young people is to dig deep and be very aware that these are difficult times, but we can come through. We've come through before difficult times. We will come through these. And what is important is to recognize the values that the UN represents fundamentally and to stand by those values. And just while I'm on it, because I feel so strongly about it, there is a part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we have neglected too much. We love the Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And unfortunately, human rights has become too individualized. There is that very important statement in Article 29, first sentence. And I don't say it in the he imports she that was there in 1948, the lack of gender acknowledgement. I use a they, but I can recite it to you because it means so much to me. Everyone has duties to the community in which alone they reach the free and full expression of their personality. If the UN would ground itself in that, ground itself in community, ground itself in that everybody has duties, and unless you fulfill that duty, you yourself don't reach your full personality, and then walk tall, because people working in the UN are working for the greater global community, and you know that it fulfills you as an individual. You feel a better person. So I think these are the kind of messages I'd love young people to feel sort of strengthened by and given hope by. But do going forward, keep talking about community at all levels. Who is, there's the local community, there's the national community, there's the regional community, and there's the global community. And duties to community is part of human rights. Thank you.
So I was just checking the latest numbers of UN staff killed in Gaza. And as of 5th June, there's a figure given of 126 UN personnel killed, and a statement that 1 in every 50 UNRWA staff have been killed. This is, of course, shocking. And alongside each of those, in many cases, there were multiple family members killed as well. I saw a shocking report of a UNDP engineer from recollection, who I probably met on my visit to Han Yunis in 2014, because the engineering team for UNDP was very strong. He was killed in a family compound with some number like 30 other family members. I mean, the trauma that families have been subjected to is just unbearable. So what is my message? My message is that our staff, like everyone else in Gaza, has been in hell. It's just a horrific situation. Our hearts go out to all of them. We hope that the ceasefire holds. We hope there will be support, and that will probably need to be psychosocial support for those who have been so harmed by what has happened. And we just admire their dedication to keep on working, even in these most terrible of times, where to go to work, if, say, you're an UNRWA teacher or health worker or any other kind of UN worker, can mean putting your life on the line. Staying home can mean putting your life on the line. If your home is, for whatever it is, tent, remaining apartment building is bombed that day. So, sitting as we do, and the safety of New Zealand and Ireland, it's almost impossible to comprehend the daily pressure that UN colleagues have been under, and our hearts go out to them.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you so much, Mary. You're such an inspiration to us that want to do something for the world, join the organization to do that, and we'll hopefully find avenues to do so even after we leave the UN. We have a lot of retired UN staff colleagues as part of the initiative itself. But it's an inspiration for us to see that you are out there speaking out for the values that the organization stands for. and we thank you for that. And unfortunately, there's no way for you to hear the applauses, but I'm sure all my colleagues are applauding you at this moment, and very grateful for your time with us. We will be putting in more information about the work the elders are undertaking in our networks, and also more information about the United Staff for Gaza initiative that we're leading. And we're very thankful for this. And thank you to everybody for joining us in this very interesting conversation. We'll be uploading this video so that you can watch it afterwards, and those that have missed it can hear your very inspiring words. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Antonio.
Thanks for having us.
And good night, Helen.
Good night.
Good.
Good morning, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was very good.
Hmm.